Hello, my name is Dr. Penny Hetletved, and I am a licensed Level 3 mental management instructor for the United States. There's 8 of us, and I'm pleased to have that title. I've been in education for 27 years, where I have been teacher, principal, superintendent, and the last 17 years have been in corrections. Why did I choose the mental management system? It was pretty simple. My girls are national archers, and we couldn't overcome perfect form because of our mental game, and so I needed to become a student of the sport. Since then, I'm a mental management coach for people within business, as well as many sports, to include archery. I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. We are actually at a national tournament where my oldest daughter will sign at her university. But what I'm going to give you today is just the content basis of what mental management is. And then, if you want more information for your own school or your own life, you can reach out to me at 701-226-1363. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm not going to put it in preview mode. For some reason that wants to lock us up a little bit more quickly. And so as we get started here, the biggest premise is that 95% of all winning is done by 5% of the participants. What does that mean? And why is that the possibility? It's all about what we think and how we think it as we go. So if we put archery aside, this one's kind of a cool little session because it's a smaller group of you, which I love, and you are all archers. And so I might give you a few examples of some other athletes that I work with. I work with some gymnasts and some, I work with one karate person. I work with some shooters in trap and skeet, and then I work with some golfers and some leaders such as brokers and realtors and wardens and such. But the reason that those 5% are winning 95% of the competitions is all about why they think. Why? They're always looking for the why. And so we're looking for the why of how we do the how and the what, right? We're always looking for solutions. So when you think about the way they think, the 5%, if you are thinking, I won't, I can't, or, well, I think I can, you're non-committal, right? If you're starting to do the I cans and the I did it's in your thinking before you ever start in that realm, now we're getting somewhere. So let's talk about that a little bit. Even in the I can, it's not for real. You're not in full commitment. If we're not making mistakes, we're not making decisions. And if we're not making decisions, we're not committed. So what did I just say there? It's important to make mistakes because all of archery is a game of progress, not perfection. The game of life is progress and not perfection. And so as we think about the ways in which we think, those 5%ers that are winning 95% of the competition already have a really good idea that they can. Right? So let's think about an I-beam. If I had a 4-inch I-beam and it was 20 feet across, right? So 4 inches of metal, steel, and it's 4 inches wide and it's 20 feet long. And I said to you, and I can't see you, so you're going to have to pipe up with my shared screen, you're going to have to pipe up. But if I said to you, it's laying on the ground, and if you can walk across that without dipping a toe onto the ground, I'll give you $100. How many of you would do that?
I would.
Right? Several of you, right? I'm thinking. I mean, you're all pretty quiet. We're going to have to work your way through that. But you would, right? Because you already have an idea. Now, have many of you went crawling on I-beams as of late? I'm guessing not. But your brain already had an idea. Did you all see yourself on an I-beam to answer that question? Our brain already makes decisions about what we can and cannot do. Your archery performance is the same way. Your brain's already making some decisions, and you need to be part of those decisions that your brain's making for you. That's your conscious mind starting to make some decisions for you. And if your conscious mind is not matching what it is that you want in performance, you're going to have to rechannel and redirect some of those thinkings. Now let's go back to that I-beam. Now, if I put it 20 feet in the air and it's 20 feet long and it's still only 4 inches wide, how many of you would walk across it for $1,000? So you all already have an I can and I did. Now, let me ask you one additional question here. Now, if I put the I-beam 3 stories up, so third floor of an apartment building across to the other apartment building in a really thin alleyway, right? Still 20 feet across, but now it's 3 stories up, and I'll up the ante to 10 grand. How many of you would do it at that point?
At this point, when even with high class tightrope walkers that walk really high up in the air, the fact falling 20 feet you're going to survive. Falling 3 stories, your likelihood of surviving is still pretty high. I mean, it's not super low, but you're willing to survive. The only thing is then you're starting to risk your own personal health. But if you know you can do it and you're comfortable with yourself doing it, and you can do it on the floor, there's no reason you can't do it 3 stories up in the air. As long as you have the balance and you can do it on the ground, on the floor, just in practice, there's no reason why you can't do it up there. It's just, at what point do you view that, unless you're unprofessional and you're a novice at this, at what point do you view that your safety is more important than just walking across it?
So he came across something that's super important for us as elite performers. What Joseph's talking about there is now we increase risk, right? And we're pretty allergic to risk. And we don't always want to gamble in those same factors. Now, adults, had I asked that question directly to Jason Burley, I'm guessing he might have started to ask, well, do I have one rope? Do I have, is there any kind of safety measures underneath? Depending on who you are, you're going to start to ask some stipulations. However, as we start to perform and pressure comes into play with tournament play, a lot of times what takes place for you all is that you start to increase risk in your own mind. So when we go back to this slide here, when we were on the ground or even 20 foot in the air, a lot of you already said, yep, I can, I did. And so you were already up here in the percentage of success you were. When it started to get to the 3 floors up, you added risk to the ball game and you came back down here to I won't take that chance or I can't. So it's really important for us now, falling from 3 stories is a little bit different than shooting a 72 and indoor season right now. However, our brains make some of that risk feel the same way. It feels as dangerous to us to shoot an 8 as it does for us to fall off that 3-story building. So let's look at this. What do the 5% think about? Well, first of all, talent is overrated. You all, what natural talent you already had, you guys already enjoyed that and you've moved past those pieces. And so talent only takes you so far, right? And then we have to look at giving 110%. Well, that's a sure way to lose. And here's why. Mathematically, it's not even possible. And so what happens when we begin to try to give 110%, we start to overthink and we start to over try. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but what it really makes us happen when we try too hard is we go past peak performance. If you think of it as a bell curve, when you were all in school thinking about grading, right? The top of the bell curve was peak performance. And overtry is going to go past peak performance and land on the other side. And sadly, and probably the most frustrating for those of you that compete on a regular basis, is that you'll actually land farther down than somebody that doesn't work as hard and or is not trying as hard. The top 5% also absolutely expect to win. Instead of trying, they just know they can win, so they will win. Talent is an advantage to do something more quickly, but unless you grow your talent, that will only take you so far and then you'll quickly plateau. You'll know people that enter the sport and they do a ton of winning right away. Well, that's because when they do a ton of winning right away, they don't know very much about the sport. And the more they learn, the more they begin to think and analyze, and the more they will get in their own heads with overanalyzing, overthinking, and overtrying. So let me ask you this. What percentage of what you do in archery do you think is mental? You're right. It's somewhere between 70 and 100%. But there's 3 different kinds of training. There's training to learn. That's when you're just wanting to get better and or you're enjoying it, right? There's training to compete. And a lot of times this is where archers stay. Training to compete is where somebody else is still probably helping you with your schedule, helping you with your support system, maybe even giving you some of the advice of what it is that you're working on, depending on if you can drive or not, getting you there, right? And then there's training to win. And training to win is where you take this system and you use it in everyday life. So I'm not a competitive archer. In fact, I blew a tendon, so I haven't even shot for about 1.5 years. But this is my journal. This is my performance journal. And I have a primary, and we're going to work on that as we work through this course in the next 4 days. But even though I'm not in archery, I'm working on something every day. And I'm collectively growing my skills within the mental system. So what is the mental management? What does it mean? The mental management is the process of improving the probability of having a consistent mental performance under pressure on demand. Well, here's the key. It's the process that's consistent. And why we need it under pressure and on demand is because that's tournament. Our process is method that's duplicated into a system. Every time we can duplicate it, we create consistency. Consistency is the form of thinking. When we work on demand with or without our coaches, then we're able to perform anytime, anywhere, based on what it is that we know how to do. Then we begin to roll with resistance. We begin to respond versus react. Pressure happens 2 different ways. It's either anxiety and fear, or it's excitement. Now, if you're one that naturally goes to anxiety and fear, don't label that. It's just how you're made up. It's how your thinking happens. That's fine. But now we have to learn for you how you redirect that into an excitement like, nope, it's like me to be able to handle this. It's like me to be able to generate the thoughts that I need for this. And that's how the mental management system came to be. So Lanny Basham actually was an Olympian. He was a 2-time Olympian, a silver and gold medalist. And when he went into his first Olympics, he was actually favored to win it because he had been beating everyone at the World Cup stage. On the world stage, he had been beating everyone, and he'd been beating them by quite a few points, right? And he goes into that 72 Olympics, and the thing that he wasn't prepared for was the media and the paparazzi and the gaming that took place where like the Russian coaches would stand behind him as he shot and holler out numbers that weren't the correct numbers of where he had hit and where they had scored, right? And all of those different things that he had not had in one commotion. Plus, he hadn't really thinking that he'd be very nervous for the Olympics because he'd been everywhere in the world for the Worlds. And so he uses this word, and he recognizes that it's not a great verb when you're working on protecting and growing your self-image, but he talks about how he choked. And so the first day was kneeling because he was a precision rifle for the Olympics. And so he was kneeling, which is his weakest of the 3, because you kneel, prone, and stand. And after day 1 of the Olympics, he was 58th out of 60 Olympians that day. And so he went back to his room pretty crushed, and he was like, well, this isn't like me to do. And he was angry, right? And he was frustrated. And he spent most of the night thinking about what good shots felt like, how he could come back and at least not be an embarrassment to his family. And he had all these other things that he was thinking about. And so when he came back on day 2, he had actually spent some time really thinking about what great shots look like. And he was in prone position, knowing that when it was all said and done, he would end up in standing position, which was his strongest. And so what he did then was he came back and he set a world record on day 2. And actually that world record still stands. And so he set the world record, and he brought himself back from 58th to 11th after day 2, right? So a remarkable recovery. And by the time standing, which was his strongest event, came to be, he ended up the silver medalist in that Olympics. Now, he left that Olympics pretty frustrated. We would all be elated to be in the Olympics, right? Period. 4 years to really do some research. And he said, funny thing about becoming an Olympian, then Olympians will talk to you. And he asked them, how do you deal with it? How do you stay on your game? How do you simulate your training in that competition mode? And what do you do to make those things happen? What he found was, it was really simple. Folks kept thinking about what things felt like when it was great. They all had different terms, they all had different processes, but you brought yourself back to seeing yourself, same as the I-beam when you said, yeah, I would do the 20 feet on the ground for $100. You already had an image that you could do it. And that is what you have to duplicate within your mental mastery, is the process to consistency. And so Lanny came back to the next Olympics with a whole nother process in place before and after the shot, which you're going to learn about. And he said, it's pretty simple then. You learn to shoot a 10 and then you duplicate it. You find the 10 and you continue to go there. Now, some people will get to that level and they will go, nope, I'm done. That was horrible. I'm not going to figure out a solution. I didn't like how that felt. And the rest that become the 5%ers look for the finite little reasons that little things start to make a difference. So the mental process is that you have 3 things that go in your mind. You have your conscious thoughts, you have your subconscious, and you have your self-image. So your conscious mind is your thoughts. They can be helpful or they can be harmful. You have to promote helpful and you have to avoid the harmful as much as you can. If you identify that you just had a harmful thought within your head, you need to redirect it. I have an archer currently that was working her process and working her mental game. She does not use a click because she is a recovered, panicked target archer, right? And so when there's loud clicks by people that are shooting beside her, it sometimes creates the same type of anxiety that she had when she went smooth. So she has to come up with other ways when those harmful thoughts come into her mind, how she will redirect those. You have to promote the helpful thoughts within your head. A strong conscious circle has a very defined primary way of thinking before, during, and after the shot. You have to have the right amount of mental effort. It can't be 110%. And thoughts have to be synced with what you are physically doing. Have you ever been so excited about something your head got ahead of your feet and you fell on your face or you stumbled or you stubbed your toe or all of those things? A lot of times our mind can go rapidly than what we can go physically. And we have to make sure that we methodically slow our thoughts down to the same pace of what it is that we are doing physically. That's really important with our conscious thoughts. Then we have our subconscious. Our subconscious is our skills. Our subconscious is what we already know how to do. Our subconscious is talking about high quality instruction, right? This is what I was talking about earlier. A lot of you have impeccable form. Why? Because you've had an opportunity to have people help you, or you've studied on your own and you've watched and you've put in hours and you've critiqued and you've asked. Technical coaches do a lot of the subconscious building of the circle because there's lots of repetition. And of course you need good equipment. That's a no-brainer at the level that all of you are at. But this is what's really important within our subconscious. This is our skills, right? Our subconscious, by the way, can do multiple things at a time. Our conscious mind can only do one thing at a time. If I asked you what you were thinking about this morning or how it went for you as you got dressed, you would all look at me like I was crazy, right? But once upon a time when y'all were still in diapers, you had to think a lot harder on how you put your clothes on.
Especially socks.
You still do? And how about shoes, right? If you still wear shoes that lace up, because there's a lot of slip-on shoes now, but if you had to tie your shoes today, most of you would not have to think about how you have to tie your shoes, right? You have that in your subconscious at this point, and you can still breathe, and you can still look, and you can still do all of the other things that you're doing as you're working the subconscious. If I slammed your finger in the door and now your finger is broken, guess what happens? Your subconscious skill of tying your shoe will now go back and forth between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, because you'll have to think about how you tie your shoe without that one finger bending, because you took it for granted that your muscles were contracting and flexing as you were tying your shoes. So your skills in your subconscious, many of them can happen at one time. Your self-image makes you act like you. This is super important, because your self-image tells you, I can or I will. Those of you that hesitated on that beam when it was 20 feet in the air, your self-image was like, oop, danger, danger, stranger danger. There's lots of risk there. Nope. Even if I bruise something, it's not worth it. I don't like pain, right? And several of you, when I went to the third floor was like, yeah, I'm out, right? At that point. So let me give you an example of what it acts like you to do. True story, New York firemen had a fire on the third floor. They took the emergency ladder and they took it across the third floor of one building that was on fire, and the building was no longer safe, right? And they spread it to the third floor of a different building. And the firefighters were harnessed on. They got to a mother and her 6-year-old son. They were in the third floor. They were at the window. They were screaming for help, and the building was getting very unsafe. It was going to collapse. They hooked the little boy on, told him that he'd be brave and his mama would be right behind him. They got him about 2/3 of the way across, and the mom refused to go through the ladder. She was panicked. She was scared about the height. She was scared of falling. And clearly the fire and all of those other adrenaline pieces were not working for her, right? So the firemen, there was a fireman kid, fireman, and then this mom, and then the fireman, right? So the last fireman says, no one on my watch doesn't get saved. And he radioed across, stop the kid. Now, to be fair, the kid was 2/3 of the way across. He was fully harnessed, and they already had a rigging on him to the building that he was at. So even if the ladder had some sort of issue, the kid was going to be safe. But the mother didn't have that in her head at that time. So if we went back to that graph about I will, I can't, absolutely can't, she was down in that 2% of performers at that point. But once it was to the point of, nope, now we're not saving your son until you are saved as well. He needs you as much as we need to save you. That's when she got on the ladder. And so that is what makes it like us to do. We have to have pay value in what it is that we're trying to work on and improve on. The opinion of ourselves is super important, but we're our worst judge. And we have to make sure that we identify when what we are saying is like us is true. Worry imprints negativity and doubt. And so self-image, every image, helpful or harmful that you give, you need to think of it as like your bank account, right? All of those are deposits. Well, do you want helpful deposits? Do you want a fat bank account of helpful deposits? Or do you want harmful ones? That's what we need to make sure that we do. Because worry is a negative imprint. It's a harmful imprint, and it makes us change how we're doing things. 90% of worry never comes true. And the 10% that does never comes true in the catastrophic ways in which we worry. So why do we worry? Because our brains are meant to protect us. That is what our brains, that's how our brains evolved over time, right? I grew up in South Dakota, and I grew up West River, South Dakota. What does that mean? That means that there was tons of rattlesnakes. That also means that my mother was super, super, super scared of rattlesnakes. Therefore, as her child, I grew up super, super scared of rattlesnakes. I'm knocking on the door of 50, y'all, and I still walk in tall grass thinking that there's a devil rattlesnake that's going to come out and eat me, right? Because that was something that was ingrained in me. So it makes it like me to worry about rattlesnakes. Now we have snakes in this country where I live now, right? Because we live out in the country, but it's like fat 5-foot bull snakes, which Lee keeps telling me are good for us. I'm not sure. But anyway, that's the point of the brain. The brain is meant to protect us. And so we have to make sure that we're telling ourselves exactly what it is that we can do. If you think that somebody else on that line can beat you, you're right. If you walk up to the shoot line already thinking that somebody else is going to have an advantage over you, you're right. If you walk up to the shoot line and think that I absolutely have to get X as a score, it's going to be less likely that you're going to hit X as a score, because the wrong side of where your brain is going to help you. Now, the good news is all of that's a choice. When people say they wake up on the wrong side of the bed, nope, that's a choice. So our self-image makes you like you. It makes you act like you. So what does that mean exactly? It is possible for two people, for an example, with the same environment. Let's say that they grow up in a very abusive home, right? You might know people that have grown up in a very abusive home, two siblings, one becomes law or a lawyer and the other one becomes chemically addicted. They both cope differently. It's the same as archers. Everyone's different. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is stop comparing yourself to others. Not one of you has the same journey. So knock it off. Okay. Now that's the mama quote of the day. So let's talk about kinds of imprints. What we do, who we are around, what we think about, talk about, and write about. That's what makes you act like you. For real. This is what makes you act like you. So what we do, well, let's talk about what we do. What we do is how we treat others, right? If we gossip, we shrink our self-image. If we compliment and help others, we grow our self-image. My self-image is what it is by how I imprint. It is what we personally do. It's like me to shoot a 10. Oh, that non-10 was unfortunate. Does that feel different than, what was that arrow? How'd that happen? I don't know what's going on, right? It feels different. It's all about what we do with the situation. Now, what we do also has to do with how we shoot. We will already have a thought in our minds when the arrow hits the target. So when your coaches say, don't worry about score, don't do this, don't do that, they're right, because they're not wanting you to be outcome based. But the bottom line is your brain's going to score the arrow. What's important though, is you have to drop the mic on where it hit, great or not great, and go specifically to what it is that you're working on. So who we are around. When you're in training, it's imperative that you have people that are training to the same height as you. If you can't always control that, then you need to come up with ways that in your training objectives, you use what they create for you in distractions as things that you work through, because you don't know who's going to be next to you when you're out at those tournaments, right? So who we are around, this is also our friend base. If who we are around are always negative, if their cup is always half empty and leaking, that's a problem, right? Because then every time you think of something, you're also going to think about the negative, harmful piece of what's going on in that situation. If you have people that are constantly talking about how they ripped their release or that arrow didn't belong there, all these things that create that harmful imagery in your head, you have some choices to make, right? You either need to level with them that that's not helpful to you, or you need to distance yourself from that person as you're training, and or you work on redirecting that thought ahead of you finishing your shot. That's salty stuff, but that is imperative for you, because who we are around makes a big imprint on what we do. What we think about, talk about, and write about. We feed ourselves stories all the time. So if we're thinking helpful thoughts, and if we're thinking about the things that we will do and who we want to become, then we have helpful thoughts in our head. When I have you start to do your performance journal, here's what's important about your performance journal. When you start to write in here, when you write, you think about what it is you're about to write. Then you write it. And as you write it, your brain talks to you as you're writing it. Well, you think about what you write about. You talk to yourself as you write, and then you almost always reread what you write. So when we're writing in our performance analysis journal, all the things and the way the prompts are written in here, you will write helpful imagery. And if you think about it, then for every one thing you write, you're depositing in your self-image bank account 3 helpful images every time you do this. You want that bank account fat. You want it juicy, you want it full. You want FDIC to not know how they're going to insure it because it is so large, right? So what we think about, talk about, and write about is super important. When the conscious, subconscious, and self-image are balanced and working together, good performance will seem easy. So no one absolutely can defeat this person when their triad is balanced, except for this person who has been running the process for longer, and it's way more balanced. It's bigger, right? So it's not only balanced, but they've grown those skills bigger.
So that was kind of the fast track of what it means to run a mental management system. There's so much more, but the conscious, subconscious, and self-image work together in your mind triad. There's actually 8 different modules that work you through level 1, 2, and 3 of learning the mental management system as a coach and as an athlete. And then in addition to that, we talk about obstacles to winning, which is specifically around pressure, and goal getting, which is not setting goals, but how you get your goals. So how you put those into parameters, not only in timeline, but also in content. But this is a little snippet for today. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at 701-226-1363. Thank you for your time today.